Alright, so the next step, these are going to get polished and these are going to get painted. I'm going to actually put the bearings in first before I do this painting process because I don't want to be pressing anything in and possibly damage my painted surface. So I'm going to put the bearings in first, and then I do bake my paint, but I only get up to about 150 degrees, so the bearings are fine in that temperature. That's not excessive at all. So I'm going to put the bearings in, and I'll show you that process. Alright, so as far as bearings go, the actual bearing size is 6301. These are 2 RS's, and what that basically is it's a sealed bearing on both sides. So it's a sealed bearing, the grease is internal, and there's no need to re-grease these. So 6301. And then what I'm going to do is put all these in the freezer, because when you chill something it shrinks, so we want to shrink the bearing. And I don't necessarily do it, but you can, and I'll just do it in this video. Is I'll put these in my oven for about 20 minutes also at about 150 degrees, because when you heat metal up it expands, so we're going to shrink the bearing and expand the metal that it's going to be pressed into to make it easier. Alright, while those 2 hubs are in the oven at about 150, actually I use a toaster oven in my garage space. I don't recommend putting these parts, and then also when I bake it with paint, I'm not telling you to put it in your actual food oven. So if you don't have an oven, I would say get yourself a gas burner like this for heating stuff. This is MAP gas. It burns a lot hotter. It's more effective than propane burning, so buy a MAP setup. But you got to be very careful if you're going to do the heating with a MAP, because it's I like the oven because it gets the whole piece warmed up gently and evenly. This is going to be a concentrated heat, so you don't want to overheat the workpiece in one area while the other part is cold. So just be careful if you use this kind of MAP or gas or something like that. That's why I like the oven, because it's an even heat process. I'm going to use a little bit of WD-40 just on the outside of the bearing to help it just slide in a little easier. A little bit of grease. These are your spacers that you should have bagged up. These are the spacers that go in between the bearings. And then I'm going to keep it simple for everyone, and I use a socket as my tool to push my bearing in, and then a mallet of choice, a hammer or mallet. This is 1 1/16 inch, which is just about the right size for the outer race of the bearing. You know, or if you guys have a shop press, use a shop press, but I'm going to keep it simple for you guys. This grease is just like an all-purpose bearing grease. So if anyone wants to know what oven I use, it's this Black & Decker. That's the model number there. It's on Amazon for $66. It's a really big one, and it's probably the best priced, plus for the size you get. This fits all the Honda rims up to CT70 rims, engine side covers. So it's a good oven if you want to get into powder coating or just baking some enamel paint like I'm doing. And then when I use it, I'm keeping my heating set about right there, and then I just bake stuff for, you know, an hour if I'm doing the paint, or just trying to heat this up for about 20 minutes. As you can see, it fits the hubs nicely, 2 big hubs. Alright, so now that our hub is warmed up, we got a frosty bearing here, I'm just going to put just a very, very little amount of WD-40 around the perimeter of this bearing. I don't want to get any oil on this because we're going to paint it, so I'm just putting just a very little bit. Get it flush in there. Alright, so this is the front hub, and this side of the hub with the neck on it, this has to go deep down in there. So we're going to seat this race down as far as it can go when it hits the ridges down there. I'm going to actually add a little heat. little bit more to go. Alright, so that's sat down in there. That's about as deep as you want it to go. So you're going to have room to put the seal here that's going to go in. So that gets the short spacer is for the front hub, okay? So I might as well just put a little grease on it, just to give it some rust prevention, I guess. You'll grease your axle before you put it in, but I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the outside of this too, so that this is a piece of steel, so I'm going to just kind of put a little coating on here to help prevent any rusting over time. So make sure you drop that in before you put your other bearing in. Alright, so this is the other side, spacer's in. These two notches here are what that speedometer gear go into, so just a little bit. Just flipped over the hub again, but one thing to note here is I'd used a little you know, if you're a TIG welder, you can obviously weld this cast aluminum, put some aluminum in. But if you don't have access to a welder, some JB Weld, I filled in some of the divots that were on the outside of here and just filled it up and let it sit overnight, and then I sanded it back down so it gives a nice finish for any kind of pock marks or anything like that as a filler. And then when you paint over it, you'll never see it, and it's resilient. So this is the rear hub now, so just do the same procedure that I showed you with getting those bearings pressed in. It's the same method. Just make sure that you don't forget to put your steel spacer. After you get one bearing in, make sure you put that steel spacer in before you put your final second bearing in, closing it off. Alright, so next few steps, let's get some painter's tape, close off your bearings. I'm going to tape off. You can make a piece of cardboard or something if you want to make a circle and slide it in here. But I'm only really concerned with the shoe area. I do want to not close it off completely because I want this outer lip right here to get painted. You will see it when the cover's on, so you'll see this lip. Don't cover it up with some acetone. If you guys have any interest in it, this is a Sure Shot bottle. You fill it with your compressed air from your compressor, and this thing sprays for a long time. Very fine mist. Don't buy the cheap one, buy this brand, Sure Shot, made in the USA. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit of an acetone spray down to get all my oils off here. And acetone flashes off really quick. I don't know if you see it on the video, but it's literally evaporating almost immediately. So I'll do one more little acetone. Once I'm going to hang my stuff. I recommend that you hang anything you're painting so that you don't have you know, dirt and stuff flying around on it. Less chances of that happening. So I'm going to hang it up, and then I'm going to put a I'll use this primer, Rust-Oleum. You guys can get it locally, etching primer on the aluminum. I'm going to do a good coat on that. You can even use a filler if you need to fill some areas that are scratched up. Filler primer. And then I use the Honda Silver Cloud, or Cloud Silver. That's the part number. Boats.net is probably the best price. Some of the other parts houses like CHP and I think Northeast Vintage Cycle carries it. But for just buying this paint, Boats.net is the best online store for it. And then once I get this on, I'm going to put everything in the oven and bake it for about 60 minutes at a really low heat, 150 degrees. It actually makes it come out really glossy. Also, I recommend respirator. Alright, so let's get our primer on. Just do kind of a light coat for the first coat here. And that's why I like to hang it, is because you actually just can spin your stuff around. So I'm going to go ahead and put my first light coat on here of this primer, and then put another coat on it, and then I'm going to let it dry for a little bit based on what your can says on the back, and then we'll be ready for the Honda Cloud. Alright, so primer's on, and you're going to want to inspect it just closely and knock after it's dried for about 30 minutes or however the can says before you start mucking with it. But I'm going to use like a 1200 grit, and I'm going to knock down any kind of high spot or fiber or anything that might have got caught while I put that primer down. And then I'll tack cloth it to get any dust off, and then we'll put the Honda Silver Cloud on with a light layer first spray. Alright, so we're at Silver Cloud, or Cloud Silver top coat now. So I'm going to put a really light coat, first initial coat of this paint on, and then what I find is that a really actually heavy second coat works really well. If you do multiple light coats as you're building up each layer, I just feel like the speckle metal that's in this, the tone, it just gets uneven. But when you do a really heavy coat, don't make it drip, but a really heavy coat makes it look really nice and even, and then it works even, it looks nice even before you bake it, but when I bake it, I find, from my impression, is that it actually gets really shiny and it looks really congruent, and it's just a really nice final even finish. Alright, so this is the first coat. You know, it's not heavy like I'm saying. I'm going to go on the second coat, but it's got really good coverage. I didn't leave any low spots or any areas that I missed, but it's hard to see in the light, but this kind of inconsistent metal flaky look is what happens when you try to keep doing light coats. Doesn't matter how many times you put a coat on, let it dry, go to the next coat. For me at least, I've always noticed that there's like this inconsistent metal flake that happens unless you go really heavy. Alright, so I'm going to do this final coat, and I'm going to show you guys how I do it like heavy and what I mean by that. You know, typically if I'm spraying on the lighter coat, I'm going to spray and then release the button or whatever, the cap spray nozzle. This one I'm literally going to just hold it down and work around the piece, making sure I don't create any runs, but I'm laying it on pretty heavy. Alright, so that's after that heavy coat. Hopefully if the camera's picking it up, you can see the gloss that it has now, and it just is very consistent with its finish. You gotta really lay it on. So I'm gonna let this hang for a little bit, and then I'm gonna put it, like I said, I'll put it in the oven and bake it up. Here's the other hub too. And like I said, this lip right here, that's exposed, so make sure you do a good paint job on that lip on the other hub too. Alright, so it's about 30 minutes of drying. The glossiness is kind of faded on the paint, so I'm going to go ahead and get a look at it here. Still got a little gloss with it. It's more or less less sheen than it did when I first sprayed it. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oven and let it bake for a little while, and I'm going to show you how dramatic the change is on that finish. Alright, so the hubs are done baking. I'm still going to let them dry before I even touch them for a day or so. But as you can see, these are really shiny now. So I think baking is like a next step to get this Honda Cloud to really you know, look its best. And then that's like an example right here. Is there's not clear coat on there. That's the Honda Cloud Silver after it's been baked. Alright, well, I'm not going to show the rims process because it's just the same. It's media blasting, and then, you know, the same tips and tricks with the Cloud Silver, baking them, and you'll get a good finish. So next video on these hubs is going to be targeted at the polishing stage. So I'm going to separate these videos so they don't get too long each. So it's going to be a video series, obviously. Thanks for watching, guys.